Now, the rest of the story. Chances are you would be distressed at the sight of an exposed female breast on prime-time commercial television. So liberated have we become regarding some things, but in other things we remain virtually unchanged from century to century. In the winter of 1843, approaching midway through the Victorian age, a mostly naked, entirely topless statue was unveiled. The unveiling was quite an occasion. There was a brass band and prominent speakers. The city's most prominent citizens turned out, but few knew what lay beneath the opaque drapery until the rope was ceremoniously yanked and the drapery was lifted to reveal this provocatively fashioned hunk of marble. Gasps of horror and astonishment were followed by interminable moments of stunned silence, and then a flurry of nervous giggling, followed by more silence. Who in the world had the nerve to approve such a thing, the indignant spectators demanded? Well, this is the rest of the story. The United States Congress approved it, even paid for it. You see, the suggestive, scantily clothed marble figure was unveiled in February 1843 in Washington, D.C., in the Capitol Rotunda itself. The fledgling United States of America was getting a dose of old world culture for which it was not at all prepared. It had sounded like such a good idea 11 years previous. Congress had concurred that a nice big European-style statue would look most attractive in the Capitol Rotunda. So they appropriated $5,000 for the project. The commission was awarded to one Horatio Greeno, a sophisticated Massachusetts-born sculptor then living and sculpting in Florence, Italy. The statue, completed, weighed about 20 tons. That made transportation unusually difficult. Its weight actually sank one ship. Its crate was so big it could not even squeeze through a railroad tunnel. And then at the end of its journey, somebody realized not even the doors of the Capitol Rotunda were large enough to let it through, so the Capitol doors were made larger, and the Capitol floors were made stronger. And at last, in the presence of congressmen and senators and the President himself, with the Speaker of the House speaking and the Navy band blaring, the topless marble figure was unveiled, and the whole country turned upside down. Senators threatened to demolish the statue until learning that the government could not legally destroy its works of art. Next, the House of Representatives plotted its removal from the Capitol building. But when they eventually got it outside, the public protested its highly visible indecency outside. Especially parents were concerned over the nakedness to which their children were now being readily exposed. In fact, it was not until many years later, when the statue was carted off to the cellar of the Smithsonian Institution, that everybody was finally happy. And it's only been since 1964 that the Smithsonian has exhibited that once controversial Capitol offense, that mostly nude marble figure with the familiar face, that towel-clad, scandal-footed, scandal-ridden, ancient, topless Greek likeness of George Washington. Now you know the rest of the story.
And now the rest of the story. A few years ago, my wife and I visited the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History and saw the statue commonly known as Enthroned Washington. I didn't know the statue existed until my visit and had no idea of the statue's controversial past, as Mr. Harvey explained, but it shocked me just as it did when first unveiled in Washington, D.C. in the 1840s. It just wasn't what I expected to see. In all that I've ever read or heard about George Washington, he was conservative in every respect, especially in the way he dressed. In 1799, Congress passed the first resolution proposing a statue of George Washington in his namesake city, but no statue was created at that time. According to the resolution adopted by the House of Representatives on February 18, 1832, the President of the United States was, this is a quote, authorized to employ Horatio Greeno of Massachusetts to execute in marble a full-length pedestrian statue of Washington to be placed in the center of the rotunda of the Capitol, the head to be a copy of Hoodin's Washington, which is in the Virginia State Capitol, and the accessories to be left to the judgment of the artist. Whoops. On July 14, 1832, Congress approved the appropriation of $5,000 to pay Greenough to create the statue. When Greenough finished the statue 8 years later, he wrote from Florence, Italy, to Secretary of State Daniel Webster, "It is the birth of my thought. I have sacrificed to it the flowers of my days and the freshness of my strength. Every lineament has been moistened with the sweat of my toil and the tears of my exile." When Congressman Henry Wise first saw the statue, he demanded that the head be saved and the torso dropped into the Potomac. During one heated debate, Congressman Wise said, "The man does not live and never did live who saw Washington without his shirt." Most critics of the statue argued over two aspects of the statue: its absence of drapery from the upper part of the figure, and the significance of Washington in a sitting posture. Greenough used Phidias's statue of Zeus at Olympia as his inspiration for his statue of George Washington. Like Greenough's statue, Zeus was also seated and bare-breasted. Greenough's Washington is pointing to the heavens with his right hand, while his left hand cradles a sheathed sword with the hilt away from him. Greenough imagined George Washington relinquishing his power following the successful American Revolution. As Mr. Harvey explained, transporting the 20-ton Carrara marble statue was no easy task. Congress had to pay to have the statue moved from Florence, Italy to Washington, D.C. It took 22 yoke of oxen to haul the statue over the Italian roads. Along the way, peasants thought the statue was the image of a saint. They knelt and crossed themselves as the statue of George Washington passed. Congress also had to pay for the damages to trees along the road from Florence to the port. Since no available Navy ship was large enough, Congress paid $5,000 to charter a private vessel called the Sea to transport the statue across the Atlantic Ocean. After the statue reached the Navy Yard, it cost another $5,000 to move it to the rotunda of the Capitol. As Mr. Harvey explained, the statue was too large to fit through the Capitol doors, and the doors had to be enlarged. When the floor of the rotunda began to sink, a pedestal was built under the floor of the statue to support it. The statue remained in the rotunda for just 3 years. The original expected cost of the statue was $5,000, but the cost eventually totaled $42,170.74. One critic said, had the sculptor titled his half-draped work Julius Caesar, the heroic Tarzan torsoed figure might now be ranked with the great works of art. The drapery has been called wonderful, and the bared muscles almost seem to ripple. Architect Charles Bulfinch, now regarded as the first American-born professional architect to practice, said the statue reminded him of somebody leaving a bath. Many people joked that Washington's outstretched hand was reaching for his clothing. After 3 years in the rotunda, due to fear that the heavy statue was causing the floor to give way, the statue was moved outside in 1843, where it stood upon a pedestal in front of the Capitol for the next 66 years. Now, Greenough was enraged to learn that the statue he had worked on for 8 years would be moved outdoors. "If it had been designed for outdoors," Greenough said, "I would have put Washington on a horse with a uniform." One newspaper article said the statue was much exposed to the elements of torrid heat in the summer and of icy cold in the winter. The statue became more of an object of pity than of admiration. 16 presidents, from James Polk to Teddy Roosevelt, gazed at it during their inaugural ceremonies. Spectators sat in its lap to watch the inauguration of Abraham Lincoln, the funeral of President James Garfield, and the swearing in of Teddy Roosevelt. It was only upon the completion of the Washington Monument in 1884 that the statue of Washington became less and less popular. In 1908, Congress spent $5,000 to move the statue to the Smithsonian Institute, where it was placed in the obscure chapel in the Graphic Arts Building behind a bank of antique printing presses. One newspaper reported, "The chapel is now a mass of cases for exhibition purposes, and the statue is quite concealed, surrounded by the lumber and glass, so that the effect it might have is altogether lost. The statue seems thrust into a hole in the wall, as a cast-off among a lot of other debris, and moreover, it is covered with gray dust until it's getting to look quite black and certainly repellently soiled." In 1964, the statue was put on display on the second floor of what is now called the National Museum of American History. It now sits in a place of prominence for all to see and for all to discuss. Now we have to remember that Horatio Greenough was an artist who was paid well and given free rein to create his masterpiece. Do you consider it a masterpiece? I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching, and as Paul Harvey would say, good day.